Craig Berube speaks on the upcoming season and dropped a little nugget who might play next to Matthews and Nyes. We'll discuss that and other comments on today's edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano, and my co-host, Dave Morassutti. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Football season is here and the hockey season is around the corner, so visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets now. There is one bet that we're going to talk about in a little bit, but there is a futures bet on FanDuel right now talking about which player will get more points head-to-head. Who scores more points this season, Mitch Marner or Austin Matthews? That novelty wager is available on FanDuel. We will both make our guesstimate on that in just a little bit, but I want to get into, Dave, first what we witnessed earlier today, or I guess what we read earlier today. Craig Berube had a sit-down interview with Jonas Siegel of The Athletic, and I think we learned quite a bit about where Berube's head's at going into this upcoming season.
Yeah, I felt like, we've seen Craig Berube not be very extensive with his answers on certain things. Felt like, pretty direct, some decent questions asked by Jonas Siegel in this interview. We've come to know that Craig Berube usually doesn't like to reveal a lot. Now, he can be saying a lot of stuff now and completely change his mind. We have seen coaches do that before. But it seems like, there's some things right now that he's planning that we'll definitely have to be keeping an eye on when training camp opens next week.
Yeah, 100%. And to be fair, I mean, once training camp starts, you're going to start one thing one way, and then if it's not working, you're going to switch it up. And no matter what you said on September 9th, September 10th, September 11th, even, it doesn't matter if it's not working come September 25th or October 7th or October 19th. What he said today doesn't necessarily, it's not set in stone by any means, but it's a good indicator of where his head's at. And we've spent a majority of this offseason speculating as to what he might do with the lineup. There's been some big roster turnover. Mitch Marner's gone. They decided that they weren't going to replace him with one player. They decided to replace him with basically three different guys. And, Craig Berube talked about it, in this piece. He understands that there's no replacing Mitch Marner, but does believe that there'll be a different team. There'll be a deeper team, one that could roll 3-4 lines and be very comfortable doing so. So it's not going to look the same as it did a year ago, but Craig Berube seems to be pretty pleased with what him and Brad Treliving together have been able to build going into 2025-26.
Yeah, it just seems like a lot of what he's been looking for, he's been getting. The symmetry between him and Brad Treliving, it's apparent. I think it's also why, Keith Pelly was okay with the decision to let Brendan Shanahan, I was supposed to say Mike Babcock for a second there, but Brendan Shanahan go, because he felt like there was enough between Berube and Treliving to kind of move forward with this. And yeah, I usually don't see coaches get too bogged down into player additions, but it seems like the players that were brought in, he had a bit of a hand in, or at least, feels comfortable with his decisions to bring some of these players in.
Yeah, and I mean, I would imagine that there would have been some conversation that was had between Treliving and Berube, like, hey, we're thinking about, there's the situation with Marner. We're looking at a couple of players. Is there one guy who sticks out to you that you think would work best for us? And maybe he piped up and said, Nick Waugh could be great in our system. I think Nick Waugh would be a perfect third line center for me. I know exactly how I'd use him. If you can somehow pry him out of Vegas in that sign and trade deal, then maybe that's the route we go. Like maybe that was a conversation that Craig Berube had. The Dakota Joshua, we know, is a player that played under Berube earlier in his career. Didn't necessarily have, the career year he had in Vancouver, but he knows him as a player, knows what he's all about, knows what he can do. So I think that he clearly had a hand in that. And he spoke about Matias Maccelli as well, the third guy that they kind of brought in to replace Marner, I suppose, by committee. The other conversation I thought was interesting, and Jonas Siegel basically asked, Marner's gone, who's going to get the opportunity to play next to Austin Matthews and Matthew Knies? And we'd speculated, there's a number of players that could make sense, and sounds like it's going to be a trial and error for a little bit, but it doesn't appear that Matias Maccelli is going to start on that line. And a lot of us thought maybe it makes sense because he has the vision and passing abilities of Mitch Marner in a lesser to a lesser degree, but kind of plays a similar pass first style role. But according to Craig Berube, he did come out and say that he does not expect for him to start him on a line, pretty much because he doesn't want to put pressure on him, and believes that what do you say here? He doesn't want him to start him there because he doesn't want him to become a pass first guy. He doesn't want to put pressure on him that he has to pass it all the time because he's playing with Austin Matthews. So wants to kind of ease him into his Leafs tenure. So maybe a surprise, but doesn't seem like we're going to see Maccelli get the top line assignment right away.
No, and I think it's a lot of pressure being put on the top line, right? Yes, he was brought in to be a top six guy, but to bring him in and say, okay, you have to be the one to now make sure Austin Matthews continues to score. I think he just wants to temper expectations, right? We've seen players come in with this team and kind of struggle to kind of get their footing. Look at Scott Laughton, right? Then Scott Laughton had to hit the ground running, and he struggled with that.
Yeah.
Right? Thrown into a new situation, and I think maybe there's a bit of understanding that, okay, we can't just throw everything right off the gun, right off the start with Matias Maccelli. And look, we heard Berube kind of say that he likes to work in pairs.
Yep. Matthew
Knies, Austin Matthews, John Tavares, William Nylander. Those two are distinct pairs. Who the third guy is, Brewer's like, we'll figure it out. like we'll find the third to work with them. But he's all about making sure that the pairs are, set in stone.
Yeah. So it's going to be a work in progress. They're going to filter guys in and out throughout camp, and it wouldn't surprise me if Max Domi starts there in camp. Again, it's something that Berube touched on, saying he's played there before. There was some success, but does want to make sure, similar to Maccelli, that Domi plays his game as well. Doesn't just pass the puck off all the time. He said, quote, Matthews can't be a one-headed monster out there. So if Domi sees, an opportunity to shoot